Alright, what is up, everybody? It's the TheSaltiestGaijin here, coming to you through YouTube, our secondary channel for the time being, where we're going to talk more about, cards coming to Historic. So, of course, if you're, of course, an avid viewer of the channel, you know Historic is one of our more favorited formats here when we start talking about MTG Arena especially. So we're going to be looking at, for the upcoming expansion, Strixhaven. There is a kind of a subset series of cards called the Strixhaven Mystical Archive, which is a set of reprints, some already on Arena, some being cards that are going to be new to Arena. We're going to actually be getting about 63 total cards, which we have just about all the cards I've been spoiled by now, with a few exceptions, which you can, once those do drop, you can, of course, see all your latest spoilers. I post them to our Facebook page, TheSaltiestGaijin. Be sure to give that a follow. And, of course, we'll also be talking about them likely as we find out about them on our Twitch channel, which we've done for pretty much all these cards so far, which you can find us at twitch.tv/TheSaltiestGaijin. Feel free to go ahead and check out, of course, some of our VODs, as well as we go live Mondays through Thursday, where we play from about 8:30 p.m. to midnight. And we play primarily Magic together, but we play some other stuff too. So go ahead and check us out, and don't be afraid to give us a follow. So today, though, we're going to be focusing here primarily just talking about the Mystical Archive. So this is a really cool set of cards. Really good artwork for the most part. And then just some really fun, interesting cards coming to Arena. So we're going to talk about the cards that have been spoiled so far. So highly recommend, if you want to check out spoilers, best place I always recommend is Scryfall to folks. MTG Goldfish works really well as well, but personally this has been one that I prefer. So we're going to take a look here, though, at the cards. So there's about 63 total cards that they'll be reprinting. 56 of those cards will be made legal on Arena. 7 of them will be banned. So we're not going to talk too much about the banned cards because they really don't have an implication, except there's one I do want to touch on because I think there's more than meets the eye when it comes to talking about it. But if you want to see what that is, in the March 24th, 2021 release, they did actually have the whole list of the 7 cards banned. So out of the 63 cards, the 7 cards they're reprinting that are banned in Historic are Channel, Counterspell, Dark Ritual, Demonic Tutor, Lightning Bolt, Natural Order, and Swords to Plowshares. And these are all banned for power level reasons. Now, I definitely agree that things like, especially Channel, Dark Ritual, Lightning Bolt, Swords to Plowshares would probably all be way too good. Demonic Tutor, I'm a little less on because tutors are only as good as the combo decks they get to be in, but I definitely understand that if you're going to have tutor effects in Historic, you definitely don't want them to be Demonic Tutor, to say the least. You'd rather them be things like Idyllic Tutor that are a little more restricted. But the one card that I didn't mention here that jumped out to me was Natural Order. So I actually think Natural Order would be a fine card to play in Arena, because right now, if we look at it just in the immediate sense, Natural Order is no different than, and what Natural Order would be doing is basically it's a way to cheat out big green creatures from your deck. Well, we already have a deck that really does that, and if we look at all the big green creatures on Arena, really the only one that jumps out is Craterhoof Behemoth. That's really the only big green creature you'd really be interested in cheating out more often than not. So I find it very interesting because we already have a deck that for 4 mana gets rid of one of its own creatures to go get Craterhoof Behemoth out of their deck. And we've played that deck. It's the red-white transmogrified deck, where it's a red-white token strategy that plays only 1 creature in its deck, which is 2 copies of Craterhoof Behemoth. Transmogrify then exiles one of your tokens, you reveal cards until you reveal a creature, and that creature will always be Craterhoof Behemoth. So I find it very interesting that in the context of Historic, Natural Order wouldn't really be that much better. It would slot into better decks, so that would be one thing that I could understand. Like if you look at like having like a series of good elf creatures instead of a bunch of generic token creator cards. that only make these kind of dirtily 1/1 tokens. I sort of get that, but I think Natural Order would have actually been a fine card to bring to Arena. But who knows? Maybe they'll unban it at some point. And we'll get to see how that plays out. But I definitely think it would make for an interesting effect to see in Historic specifically. But moving on. So here, just looking through the reprints, here I'll just start by saying this is Swords to Plowshares as well. This is the Japanese alternate art, which you can get by, I believe these will be available on Arena as, like, you can purchase them, which they're absolutely beautiful. And I think they're absolutely stunningly awesome artwork. Especially, I love the Demonic Tutor artwork. But Swords to Plowshares, of course, like we said, is banned, so is Demonic Tutor, so is Channel. But we got Opt here. So if you weren't excited to have probably, what is it, your 8th or whatever, 5th Opt in your collection, get ready for another one. Remember, every time we complain about having Opt in our collection, Wizards of the Coast reprints it in a standard set. So always remember that. But we're not going to talk too much. If it's a card that's already legal on Arena, we're probably not going to touch on it for too long. So we have Approach of the Second Sun. Again, another card already on Arena, so not going to really talk too much about this. I love the artwork, absolutely stunning. We have Day of Judgment. There is a brand new card to Arena. What's really interesting, actually, about Day of Judgment is, traditionally Wrath of God is a strictly better Day of Judgment because it says destroy all creatures that can't be regenerated. But specifically in the context of Arena, there are no cards that regenerate anything. So Day of Judgment is essentially just a functional Wrath of God, because that text doesn't necessarily mean anything on Wrath of God. So this will actually be really interesting in the dynamic that the card Meddling Mage is legal. And there's some other effects that do similar things to Meddling Mage in the format, where having differently named Wrath of Gods is a utility, especially in closed field tournaments, which the latter isn't. But even in there, it may be one of those things where it's technically correct to not play 4 Wrath of Gods, but to play, 2 Wrath of Gods, 2 Day of Judgment, or even like if you wanted it, you could even play like a copy of Shatter the Sky in the mix as well, just to have differently named cards so that your opponent does play something like a Meddling Mage, which would prevent you from casting one of them. You still have access to the other ones. But moving on, we got Defiant Strike. Beautiful artwork, but again, just a card that's already on Arena, so just getting a new art version of the card, which is exciting, but not anything we're going to write home about. Divine Gambit. I recall, I believe this is a reprint from Commander Legends. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. This card is not good. It's white, sorcery, exile target artifact, creature, enchantment, and opponent controls. That player may put a permanent card from their hand onto the battlefield. So the problem with this card is that decks that play artifacts, especially in Historic, we'll look at the context of Historic, creatures and enchantments, typically have a lot of those style of permanents, or they will also have things like Planeswalkers and stuff like that. So like if I pop let's say we're playing against blue-white control and I'm playing this in my aggressive deck, and I go, I'll blast your Baffling End, right? Just as an example, not really something I'd recommend doing. And they put Teferi, Hero of Dominaria onto the battlefield. Well, I'm feeling pretty SOL so far, and how that interaction is played out. Now, ultimately, I could see like lines of play where this works out in your favor, where you do blast something like that, and then you can attack down the Teferi. But I don't know, allowing your opponent to essentially cheat on mana seems like way too big of a drawback. And even if the bottom end of this card is you exile a creature and your opponent puts a land from their hand onto the battlefield, like, sure, Path to Exile is a good card, right? But at the same time, Path to Exile isn't a 2-mana sorcery, it's a 1-mana instant. And I just don't really see Divine Gambit being very good in the format. Next up, we got Ephemerate. Ephemerate's an interesting card. It's 1 and a white, just 1 white, instant, exile target creature control, and then return it to the battlefield, and it has the keyword Rebound, which, if you cast it from your hand, you exile it, and then you get to cast it again at your next upkeep. Super cool card. I love Rebound the mechanic. Really fun card. Not really sure if this card has a home, because you could argue, like, oh, it could protect my creatures, and so on and so forth. But which I guess in some cases, if you have creatures with really good enter, it's the battlefield triggers. Ephemerate might be a very good card for you to play as a protection spell versus, say, a God's Willing. Because then you get 2 layers of it versus just the one. But it remains to be seen. I can't really think of a deck that would necessarily want this as some kind of like creature protection spell over something like God's Willing. So moving on, we got Gift of Estates. So this is another Commander All-Star. People play this card a lot. So if an opponent controls more lands than you, search your library for up to 3 Plains cards. Notably, it doesn't say basic Plains cards. So that's you can grab things like cycling lands that have the dual land types, and then you put them into your hand. So this is an interesting card, at least. Not sure how good it is in the format, but, you know, in some cases, like, if I'm playing a land-heavy deck that has a lot of plains, you know, on the draw, where you're a land drop behind no matter what, you know, this could be a 2-mana draw 3, essentially, but I just don't... It remains to be seen how good this is, but who knows, maybe there's a home for it. It'll be an interesting card. I think it's an interesting card to add to the format, because it's a card that somebody somewhere, I'm sure, will find a deck that wants it and can fully take advantage of it. So I'm really excited to see if maybe somebody besides me figures out how to use that. Next up, we got God's Willing. Not a new card for Arena, but boy, is that a sick artwork. Absolutely loving a lot of the artwork on these cards. They are phenomenal, if you ask me. Actually, close some of these tabs. Next up here, we got a card that was spoiled in Foreign. Oh boy, it's Mana Tithe. Have you ever been Force Spiked? Alright, let me rephrase that. Have you ever been Force Spiked by your mono white opponent? Well, get ready. So, a lot of people don't necessarily know this, but counter spells are not normally in white, of course, but they are a thing that white has actually had over the years, especially way back in Magic's older days, where actually Mana Tithe is what they called a color-shifted card, where it was I think it was Planar Chaos, where they printed off-color cards. Like, so this was literally white Force Spike. That was literally what it was, even, because that was a color-shifted card from blue to white. But white has had counter spells. It's an interesting card. I don't really see it getting a whole lot of competitive play. I'm sure some people will play it and try it out, but, you know, in like a control deck, for example, this being 1 mana isn't really a utility. Censor is a card that exists, and so is Jwari Disruption, and those are just strictly better cards in, say, that control strategy. But who knows, maybe some mono-white aggro deck ends up settling on copies of Mana Tithe as a kind of a surprise getcha style effect. Moving on, we got Revitalize. Again, not a new card to Arena, but definitely a fun one that's being added. Sick artwork again. Absolutely a big fan of the artwork on a lot of these cards. Moving on, we got Teferi's Protection. This is interesting. I believe this is a Commander card or a Battle Bond card. I can't remember. But it was until your next turn, your life total can't change. You gain protection from everything. All permanents you control phase out. And then you exile this, so it doesn't go to your graveyard. This is a very interesting card. I see this being a card that, if it does see play, it's in, like, a control deck. And it's literally just as a way to beat out, like, combo decks. Like, a lot of combo decks, once they, especially in Historic, you know, once they've dedicated so many resources to their combo and they're doing their thing, the ultimate disruption with Teferi's Protection. They literally can't do anything to interact with you for the rest of the turn, which just puts you in this position where you can win. Now, there's also plenty of combo decks that where this wouldn't do anything against, is the other thing. Like, say, Self-Mill, Thassa's Oracle, style win conditions that exist in the format, but those aren't really prevalent anyway. But Teferi's Protection adds an interesting layer of interaction, at least. Or a card that at least ceases interaction, I should say. Moving on, we got Blue Sun Zenith. Not a whole lot to say about Blue Sun Zenith. It's, if you're looking for a 3-colored spell with a draw X effect on it, Sphinx's Revelation is legal, and likely you're playing blue and white in those style of decks, so very interesting card. Could see some play in non-white blue decks that want to draw a bunch of cards at once, or maybe in some kind of combo deck that can make infinite mana, and then you target your opponent and you make them draw their whole library. So maybe there's something that way, but it remains to be seen. I really don't see this one seeing a lot of play. There's not really a good home for it, because even the blue-white decks that exist don't even play Sphinx's Revelation, let alone a card that is, more often than not for them, a worse version. Now this card got a lot of buzz. Brainstorm. Brainstorm will be legal in Historic. A lot of people thought it wouldn't be, but it will be. Brainstorm is a card that a lot of people get this idea in their head that this card is broken. This card is powerful. Contextually. It is not powerful by itself. Matter of fact, Brainstorm by itself is not a bad card. It's just not, like, anything you're going to force your decks to play. I see it seeing play. I see people trying it out and trying to find ways to play, because it is a card that if you can find a way to really synergize with it, then you can really do some damage against your opponents. So Brainstorm is 1 blue, instant, draw 3 cards, and then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. So to expand on why this is powerful in older formats like Legacy and why it will never be printed in Modern is the existence of fetch lands. Fetch lands are already incredibly powerful, and when you combine Brainstorm, picture a world where like you have 2 cards you don't want in your hand. Like say you have a bunch of lands, right? In your hand, you don't need all these lands. If you go Brainstorm, draw 3 cards, put 2 of those lands back, activate a fetch land, shuffling your library, putting a land into play, you have effectively turned Brainstorm into a draw 3 cards. You've taken advantage of the drawback of this card. So if there's decks out there, and we have like, Fabled Passage and to a lesser extent Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, which I don't really see those like moving up in power level, but maybe there's a 2-color deck that takes full advantage of the fact that those lands exist, and that they can take advantage of that drawback, just like those classic Legacy decks that do. So this will be an interesting card. I'm really excited to see it come into the format, and I'm really excited to play it around and tinker with it, and just really try to see how we can take full advantage of it. It's definitely a card that will work with a lot of these new cards in Strixhaven with Magecraft, because it's just a cheap quality instant that you can try to take advantage of. So I definitely see it being really good because of that. As well as later on, we'll actually see, even right here, cards like these Storm cards. This seems like a kind of card that would help enable some of that stuff. Moving on, though, we have Compulsive Research. So we already have Thirst for Knowledge, and when you got the newer Thirst of Meaning, those are draw 3, discard 2, unless you discard the first being artifacts, the second being enchantments. Well, this is a similar design, except this one's on lands, and it's also a sorcery. So I see this one, those cards don't really see a whole lot of play right now. Thirst for Meaning sees some play in blue-white decks that play a lot of enchantments. So that really, but that's fringe at best. So I don't really see Compulsive Research fitting into any strategies, but maybe it will. I really like this card. I'm really happy to see it not being played with Uro, so that's something. But definitely not a card that has a clear home. Got Counterspell. This is one of the cards that they're banning, so we're not going to talk too much about it. We got Memory Lapse. Memory Lapse, that's cool artwork. Absolutely love that. But Memory Lapse was a standard all-star, if I recall correctly, because I believe, Blue-Green Madness was the deck in that standard, if I recall my Magic history correctly. And this is just a really good card. It's 1 in a blue, instant, counter target spell. If I stop there, that sounds broken, right? Especially when you're looking at Counterspell right next to it. But what this does do is it puts that spell on top of its owner's library instead of into their graveyard. So think of this for us older Magic players. This is a very similar kind of effect to Remand. It doesn't hard counter spells necessarily. It just slows your opponent down. Now, Memory Lapse especially can be brutal if you're putting, like, clunky cards, or like say if your opponent like really extended into something with like treasure tokens or whatever it might be, memory lapsing something your opponent has used temporary resources they don't get back onto top of their library is actually really powerful. So I actually see memory lapse being a pretty strong card for like tempo strategies that want like an effective cheap counterspell that just buys them more time. And then it just has like these scenarios where it's going to be pretty devastating. So moving on though, we got Mind's Desire. I'm not happy to see this card get printed, to be honest with you. And we'll see, there's a few more cards down the list that I have a similar opinion of, all of which have Storm, as it turns out. Mind's Desire is for other folks out there like me who are really big into the history of Magic. Mind's Desire was banned before it could be played, really. Like, it was banned day one of its standard, if I recall correctly. It's a 6-mana sorcery. Shuffle your library, then exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost, and then it has Storm. So the only thing that's a benefit here is that Storm doesn't have any good clear enablers, especially in blue, to really make this card super broken or anything like that. But ultimately, Mind's Desire is the kind of card that is likely that is in the category of it is either way too good or way too bad, more often than not. And I don't see a healthy middle ground between those two sides. So not happy to see a card like this, because it's either going to be so good that we may have to ban something that either enables it or it itself, or it's just not playable at all, and it's just kind of a waste of a mythic here. Moving on, we got Negate, Strategic Planning, and we'll also talk Whirlwind of Denial. These are just 3 cards already on Arena. Sick artwork, though. I love all of these, especially these 2. This one's really cool as well. I love all the artwork on all these cards so far. Been absolutely stunning. But we'll talk here. We got Tessard's Gambit. It's a little concerning here. That looks like the forbidden door might be open, so to speak, if we're getting Storm cards and Phyrexian mana. So Phyrexian mana for a lot of the newer Magic players isn't something that they're very familiar with, unless they play maybe some Modern, or if they're fans of things like Vintage Cube. So this is 3 and a blue, but this is a special blue mana symbol that it clarifies down here, luckily. This could be paid with blue or 2 life. So ways to make things cheaper by trading life is why they banned this card out of this set, because this is like the original pay life to get mana style of effect, and this mechanic can be very concerning. Tessard's Gambit here, on the other hand, as a card specifically, I'm not that worried about Tessard's Gambit. It's essentially for 3 mana and 2 life, any deck can play this to draw 2 cards and proliferate. Not many decks really want to play 3 mana draw 2s to begin with, but maybe eventually some deck wants to play a copy or 2 of this, but I doubt that this will really find a home. Well, we're on to the black cards, my favorite color. We got Agonizing Remorse over here, another already on Arena card that's being reprinted with some sick looking artwork. Absolutely loving that. Looking beautiful, this artwork. We got over here, this one, I already know this card. It's Crux of Fate, just I can tell by the artwork itself. But Crux of Fate, it's a Wrath style effect, so destroy, board sweeper, so to speak. For 3 and 2 black, you can do one of 2 things, either destroy all dragons or destroy all non-dragons. This is a really fun design, and if you're playing like dragons in your deck, this could be like a one-sided sweeper spell. So I find it very interesting in that regard. I don't really see there being a lot of decks, like maybe the Grixis decks that play Nicol Bolas the Ravager as one of their only creatures. That just so happened to be a dragon. This could be some most of the time one-sided board wipe, but really there aren't many good dragons that see a whole lot of like regular play. Really the only big one that jumps out is like Corvold. It's a dragon, but that's more incidental than anything else. So not really a card I see seeing a whole lot of play, but definitely an interesting card to bring into the format. I'm never opposed to having a wider variety of sweeper effects. Next up, Dark Ritual. Again, this is one of the cards that they banned, and for good reason. If you're going to make these Storm cards legal, please, for the love of God, don't make Dark Ritual legal. This is old school Magic at its best right here, and not a thing. I personally don't think ritual effects, which is the colloquial term we use for spells that just add more mana than they cost to spend. These don't have a place in Magic anymore. Not in my opinion. I think that these are an unhealthy design from days gone by. So we'll move on though. We got Literal Doomblade. Heck yeah. Doomblade is the poster child removal spell that we talk about whenever we talk about removal spells, and that's kind of the benchmark, the measuring stick is it as good as Doomblade? Is it a Doomblade? Or we call things Doomblade style effects. So I like seeing Doomblade. Right now in Historic, there's way too many black creatures for this card to be very good. You know, between Priest, Mayhem Devil, Corvold, the list goes on. You know, just even from the one deck, let alone the others. But definitely an interesting card. Never opposed to having a wider variety of these kind of funneled removal spells that can only target specific things. Oh, anybody who's watched our stream knows exactly how I feel about this card. Inquisition of Kozolak will officially be historic legal. This card is going to have such a huge impact on the format that it's going to be crazy, in my opinion. You know, with we already have Thoughtseize in the format, and Thoughtseize and Inquisition of Kozolak are like they're the Legion of Doom pairing that beat up a lot of decks in Modern, and I absolutely love playing Thoughtseize decks, and I love playing Inquisition of Kozolak. So personally, regardless of how good it actually is, which I think it's going to be very, very good, I look forward to playing with this card. But for those who don't know, I know we're having it right on screen. It's target player reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it with converted mana cost 3 or less, and that player discards it, and then it costs 1 black. So it's the same cost as Thoughtseize. It is restricted in what it can grab, but especially with more powerful, cheap cards come into the format, this is a really good card at disrupting early games, disrupting combo decks, and just it's going to fit into so many good black strategies. Like Rakdos Arcanist is going straight in there, as well as I see this helping more mid-range strategies kind of combat the more synergy-focused decks, because that's really what this does. Is mid-range decks traditionally have been the decks that have played this. And I'm super pumped to see this card come into the format. This is the one I'm most excited for so far. Got Sign in Blood. Nice classic card here. Get beautiful artwork. For black, 2 black, sorcery, target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. So this is really cool because we just got Death Shadow into the format. So this kind of adds an extra layer to those decks with giving them some card draw. Which is never a bad thing and a pretty efficient card draw. But another thing that could not be understated is there's many players out there, myself included, who have been killed by my opponent targeting me with a Sign in Blood, because that does say target player. So this is also kind of a 2-mana burn spell in some scenarios, where the drawback is they draw 2 cards. But if your opponent's at 2 life, I don't care how many cards they have, they're dead, and I'm all about that life. So it's a fun card to see come to Arena. We got Tainted Pact here. Now this card's complicated, just to be perfectly honest, so we'll read through it. It's 1 and a blank, instant. Exile the top card of your library, first thing you do. Then you may choose to put that card in your hand unless it shares its name with another card in your hand. So if I have Island in my hand and I show off an island, then the problem is I can't put that island in my hand. So if I can't put that card in my hand, or I choose not to, I repeat this process until I've exiled 2 cards with the same name. So in this case, say I exile another island. Now it's done. The effect is over. Or I just keep going until I say I want this card in my hand. So very powerful effect, to say the least. It's kind of one of these more complicated cards that, to be honest, its application is not very obvious. But there are decks I could see, especially as we get more and more cards into the format and mana bases become less diverse. You don't run into that problem where you have an island in your hand, an island on the exile pile, and another island in your deck, where you just have all differently named lands and so on. And this could be a very interesting card for a deck like that. where you take full advantage of the fact that all your cards are named differently. To make it more into like a tutor style effect, or you can combine it with a card like, say, Thassa's Oracle. It's a really good example, and then all of a sudden you're looking at where you're milling yourself out pretty drastically. So I think this will be a fun card. Definitely another card that feels like it's either unplayable or way too good. So little concerning again for seeing a reprint like that. That's kind of been a common theme amongst a good number of these reprints. Also, the opposite has been true. There's been a lot of reprints that are really good and quite fair in the format as well. Next up, we got Tendrils of Agony. Again, this is just another card that it's either way too good or way too bad. Another Storm card. Luckily, again, with Historic, there's not really a whole lot of great Storm enablers in black. So I don't really see this seeing a whole lot of play as a Storm card. But, again, it's one of those things that, one day somebody just figures out the correct combination of cards, and all of a sudden you have a really broken deck on your hands, which is not great. Moving on, we got Village Rites, and then I'll just say this is Claim the Firstborn here. I'll just show it off. So there's another new artwork, which I absolutely love this artwork, so all about that. Same with Village Rites, this looks great. But we got Chaos Warp. So this is a Commander favorite. For 2 and a red, it's exile target permanent. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library, then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent, they put it onto the battlefield. This is similar to the white card we looked at up here, Divine Gambit. I don't really see this card being very good, but it does offer red, specifically, and answer to enchantments in a certain way. So maybe it sees a little bit of fringe play specifically because of that, but that's a very real drawback, especially given that enchantment decks in the format play a lot of permanent cards, so this is almost guaranteed to hit something. But moving on, though, we got Faithless Looting. Now, art is subjective, and I don't want to bash whoever drew this artwork, right? I'm sure that I think this is going to grow on me over time, I'm sure, because I'm going to be playing with this card a lot, but the artwork definitely stands out here, we'll say, amongst a lot of people. Been a lot of we'll say mixed feedback, mixed reviews of this artwork. Definitely a very interesting choice. But Faithless Looting, the card, just objectively, this is a very good card. It is one of those cards that at its surface, and for quite a long time, people didn't think it was very good. Matter of fact, I remember, this is years ago, 2013. I'm playing Modern. Playing red-black mid-range for the very first time, which I would leave and move away from and play other decks for a really long time. But I'm playing like Young Pyromancers and Lilianas, and I'm like, what do I really want in this deck? And I'm playing like Demigod of Revenge and like these really sick top-end cards that weren't very good. But it was like, I really just need a way to make my hands better. So I was like, oh, this card looks interesting. So we played Faithless Looting, and we had ourselves a grand old time. And I was like, gosh, why aren't more people playing this card? This card seems really good. They're like, well, it's card disadvantage, right? Because you're using the 1 card to draw 2 cards. So you got -1, which is Faithless Looting, +2 to draw 2 cards, into a -2. So it's a -3 to +2. So you're losing a card in the exchange of resources there. So a lot of people were like, well, this card just isn't very good unless the cards you're putting in your graveyard have some value. Now, in that deck, it was triggering Young Pyromancer, so my 1 card could be looked at. I was making a 1/1, and I was putting cards like Demigod of Revenge in the graveyard, and then also Lingering Souls was being put into the graveyard. So it's just like, I didn't really understand, like, why wasn't this very good? And then fast forward years later, all of a sudden, Mardu Pyromancer is like a real deck that is in the finals of the Pro Tour. And it's like this black-red Young Pyromancer deck that's using Faithless Looting to put cards like Lingering Souls in its graveyard. And I was like, oh my goodness. Faithless Looting is really good. Now, that's not the reason why Faithless Looting is banned in Modern. That's more related to the card Arclight Phoenix, which, funnily enough, the card Arclight Phoenix is legal in Historic. And I see this Faithless Looting adding a whole new element to the format, because there's a lot of decks like Croxa decks that want cards in their graveyard. The fact that we have all these escape creatures, just in general. We have flashback cards that this synergizes with, as well as just, it just draws a high volume of cards very quickly. I see this being a card that's going to help push the format into a whole new element of coming into the format, which I'm really excited for. Absolutely excited to see Faithless Looting come into the format. But we'll move on. We got Grape Shot. Grumble, grumble, old man, grumpy, grumble, grumble. More Storm cards. Not a big fan of Storm as a mechanic. Specifically, actually, I'm not a fan of Grape Shot. I'm fine with the other two because they're a lot harder to enable. Grape Shot, out of all of the Storm cards being reprinted, is the easiest card to enable, and that's why I'm concerned about it. So, in Kaldheim, we got the card Burgi, which says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you make a red mana. Or is it whenever you cast a red spell, you make a red mana? I have no idea. All I know is it makes a bunch of red mana and makes it really easy for me to cast a bunch of cheap spells like Faithless Looting and other random nonsense. So I'm very concerned that Grape Shot may push that's the one that's going to push the limit of, we've gone just a little too far here. This is not okay anymore. We're beyond this being like an okay thing to have because it's hard to enable, where this one's not that hard to enable, realistically, even in just the context of Historic. So a little worried to see how Grape Shot plays out here. This here we got, what's this, Increasing Vengeance. So this is essentially, I don't see this card seeing a lot of play. It is new to Historic, so it's exciting, but it's copy target instant or sorcery spell, so it's essentially Reverberate, which is a card we already have. And then if you flash it back, you copy that spell twice. I don't really see this seeing a whole lot of play, because we already have effects that do this, that have other modes and stuff like that, so not great. We got Mix's Mastery. This is an interesting card. It's 3 in a red. Exile target card that's an instant or sorcery card in your graveyard, and then for each card exiled this way, copy it. You may cast it without paying its mana cost, and then it exiles itself. Then it has the mechanic Overload, which then for 8 mana, 5 and 3 red, you could just get it changes target card to each card. So a very fun mechanic. I really like Overload, so this will be interesting card. I don't really see it seeing a whole lot of play because it doesn't really have a good home, but there could be a home for a card like this at some point in the future. So it'll be really interesting to see how this one plays out, but I don't really see it being played in a fair deck to begin with. So maybe it might end up being a really big enabler for stuff like this Grape Shot here. All right, we got this. This looks like Shock. Yep, it's just Shock. So really cool artwork on it, but it is just Shock. All right, we got Stone Rain. This is an interesting. It's a classic. Just 2 in a red, destroy target land. A lot of people out there don't like land destruction. I'm not one of them. I think being able to interact with lands in a healthy way. I don't think Strip Mine or Wasteland are healthy, but I think cards like Stone Rain, and to a lesser extent Sinkhole, and to an even more extent, I personally love the card Blood Moon, but I do think in a non-fetch land format like Historic, Blood Moon would probably be just too much for the format to reasonably play around. But I like Stone Rain. If any land synergies like say Field of the Dead get too good, Stone Rain's not bad. I don't really see it seeing a whole lot of play because this is just not very good in the current setting, but definitely an interesting element that they're willing to bring land destruction spells into the format. All right, we got Thrill of Possibility. Again, sick artwork on a card we already have on Arena. Got Urza's Rage. This card's not great. 2 in a red instant to deal 3 damage and it can't be countered. And then it has this very unrealistic kicker cost of 9 mana, so you pay 3 plus 9 to deal 10 damage to that permanent or player, so the damage can't be prevented. You will basically never kick this, because even that kicker, if you even just do the math, 12 mana is not worth 10 damage at any point. If it ever does get played, it's normal mode here, but I doubt we'll see that. Moving on, just to kind of cut out a few cards, Adventurous Impulse, Cultivate, and even like Snakeskin Veil down here. All cards we already have on Arena, so we won't talk too much about them, but really nice artworks again. Got Abundant Harvest. This is an interesting card in the sense that it's not legal in Modern from this printing, but it will be legal in Modern when it sees its tactical first printing in Modern Horizons 2. It's a really weird card. Basically, this is a one-shot version of the card Abundance, so you choose land or non-land when you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a card of the chosen kind. You put that in your hand and the rest of the bottom in a random order. Not bad, not great. I don't really see it seeing a whole lot of play, in at least in regular constructed, so... But definitely an interesting design. Moving on, though, we got Harmonize. I like Harmonize. Harmonize is a really fun card. It's 2 and 2 green, sorcery, draw 3 cards. This card is really good on rate, because we see, like, Into the Story get played a lot, and this is very similar to that, except it's not instant, and it only requires green mana, but not any setup like Into the Story does. So I could see this seeing play if we're ever in a position where the format is very attrition-y based, which I actually see the format shifting to that a little bit with Inquisition of Kozolak coming in. So very interesting card to see, though. I'm really happy to see something like Harmonize come into the format. Next up, we got Krosan Grip, another Commander All-Star. 2 and a green, instant, destroy target artifact or enchantment. It has this really interesting mechanic called Split Second. So basically, as long as it's on the stack, so you've cast it and it hasn't resolved yet, players can't cast spells or activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. Essentially, it can't be countered by a spell or ability. However, just to clarify, it can be countered with triggers. So like if I cast Krosan Grip and I have a prowess creature, prowess can trigger on top of the Krosan Grip on the stack. But I couldn't activate, like, I couldn't sack a Mind Stone to draw a card in response to Krosan Grip, as an example. So an interesting card. I like this kind of interaction. It's on rate for being, having split second and such. So very interesting card to see come into the format. Natural Order. We talked a bit about this at the start. Again, love the artwork, but just another one of those cards they banned out of the gate. Primal Command. This is another one of those commander cards people really like to play. I don't really see it having a home. 5 mana, gain 7 life. You get to choose 2. It's gain 7. Put target creature permanent on the top of its owner's non-creature permanent on top of its owner's library. So you can put like a land on top of their deck, for example. Target player shuffles their graveyard into their library, and then your target opponent, search your library for a creature card rather, and put it into your hand, then shuffle. So a few things I see, like you could put like a planeswalker on top of their library and then shuffle their graveyard into their deck, essentially acting as a way to, like, a 5 mana removal spell. I just don't see this being very played. I mean, I could see there being a world where you might want this card, especially because it could be like good against aggro decks while also doing other things in other matchups, but I don't really see there being a clear home for it. Is more the issue. So I believe this is just Regrowth. Regrowth is a classic Magic card. 1 and a green. Turn target card from your graveyard to your hand. Not really all that powerful. We have plenty of Regrowth style effects already in Historic, and they're not particularly played, but definitely an interesting card to see come into the format. We got our last Storm card here, Weather the Storm. Out of all the Storm cards, it's the most fair one, because it doesn't kill your opponent ever. It's just 1 and a green, gain 3 life, Storm. This is really good. It shines against, like, Spell Slinger decks. Like, this would be good against the decks playing Grape Shot to try and kill you. Because for every time they got to copy Grape Shot, you get that many times plus 1 to copy Weather the Storm. So it could be really strong. So very interesting card to see come into the format. It could be used as a counter if those Grape Shot decks ever get on hand. And same with Tendril decks if they ever get on a hand. But at the same time, it also offers like an interesting dynamic to like even like burn matchups where if your opponent, they hit you with the Wizard's Lightning and you're like, all right, well, Weather the Storm, which gains you 3 life, countering the Wizard's Lightning and then gains you another 3 life, which is really fascinating of a design there. Alright, we got D-Spark, another card that we already have on Arena, so not going to talk too much about it. Really cool artwork, though. And then we'll just mention Growth Spiral again, Growth Spiral being another card we already have Arena, but we have some really interesting cards here in the multicolor side. We got Electrolyze. This is an all-star card. 1 blue, red, deals 2 damage divided amongst 2 targets, up to 1 or 2 targets, rather, and then draw a card. This is a really solid card, good at killing small creatures. like X1s and X2s, because you get to draw that card. So a very strong card from Magic's history. Really cool artwork even. Really excited to see it come into the format. Lightning Helix, another card. This card is good for both aggressive decks, but also control strategy. So really good card kind of across the board. Really the only decks that can't take full advantage of it are like mid-rangey strategies. But I really like this card. Really happy to see something like this come into the format where it's just a good kind of 2-mana burn spell. Can be used as removal on small creatures, but also gain some life so it can help stabilize matchups. Really just solidly good card. Putrefy, I like this card. It can't be regenerated clause, just like how we said with Wrath of God. There's nothing that regenerates in the format currently, so not really all that relevant. But having a way to destroy an artifact or creature, I see Putrefy being a fairly solid choice when you're designing sideboards. Where if you're like, well, I want another way to destroy an artifact, but I also need a card in a matchup to bring in that destroys a creature. So I can combine those two cards together into one sideboard slot, and Putrefy does that. So just a really interesting instant to bring into the format to be able to improve sideboard quality in the deck building process. So wow, that was quite a lot of cards. A lot of really interesting ones coming into Historic. But of course, now that you've heard a little bit more about what I think, of course, I'll expand a little bit more as we try these cards out on stream. Which again, you can check our stream out. It's at twitch.tv/TheSaltiestGaijin, or you can follow me on Facebook at TheSaltiestGaijin, where I also post about these cards as the spoilers come out, and I try to interact with everybody there a little bit as well. But really importantly, I want to hear what you all think, which you can do down below in the comments section. Let me know which cards you're really excited to see reprinted, whether that's for Historic on Arena, or if you're just really jazzed about seeing some of these cards get reprinted for tabletop Magic. I know a lot of the cards, especially like Demonic Tutor here, is a card a lot of Commander players can struggle to find. Because it does fluctuate up and down in price, sometimes being very expensive, while other times being not so much, and it's hard to always to get your hands on something like this. But as always, I absolutely appreciate everybody taking a little bit of time out of their day to spend with me here while I talk about Magic cards. But of course, go ahead and, if you have the opportunity, if you can click that like button and the subscribe button down below, as well as you can click that bell for notifications when we do upload to our YouTube channel. That way you can stay up to date with all the kind of card reviews that we do here. But of course, with that, I'll be signing off. I'll be going live next today. As of recording, this is March 27th. My next scheduled day to go live here for Twitch is going to be March 29th at 8:30 p.m. Central. So feel free to check us out. I can't wait to see you there. But as always, I appreciate everybody taking some time to watch, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. We will see you again soon.